I'm not a fan of program hopping or very frequent program changes. Many coaches like these concepts, honestly, because it's basically a way of faking progression. So strength, you can think of strength as the sum of neural and morphological gains. So you have neural and morphological contributions to that make you stronger. Basically, your muscle gets bigger, that's morphological. And your nervous system, like your brain, basically make your muscles capable of utilizing the existing muscle mass better.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by Health IQ, a life insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, high-intensity training participants, and more get a low rate on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/cwarrior to support the show and see if you qualify. If you take care of yourself, you do smart strength training, you eat well, and your life insurance company doesn't seem like they care, there's an answer for you. Health IQ actually gives savings to people who take care of themselves. About 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on their life insurance because of this. Health IQ customers can save up to a third because physically active people have a 56% lower risk of heart disease, 20% lower risk of cancer, and 58% lower risk of diabetes compared to people that are inactive. But your life insurance company probably just doesn't care. You care, and there are companies out there that care. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/cwarrior or mention the promo code CWarrior when you talk to a Health IQ agent. Hey guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior, the podcast that teaches you how to optimize your health, exercise, business, and lifestyle. My former guests include paleo pioneers Mark Sisson and Rob Wolf, zero carb carnivore Dr. Sean Baker, high intensity strength training experts like Dr. Doug McGuff and Drew Bay, successful serial entrepreneurs, time management gurus, New York Times bestselling authors, bodybuilders, sports scientists, and everything in between. This was a really special episode with the one and only Menno Henselmans. Menno is an online physique coach, fitness model, and scientific author, and the creator and director of Bayesian Bodybuilding. That's BayesianBodybuilding.com. Once a former business consultant specializing in advanced statistical data analysis, Menno traded in the company car to do what he's really passionate about, which is helping serious trainees attain their ideal physique. In this episode, we talk about Menno's life as a digital nomad. He literally lives out of 2 suitcases, and he gives the real view on what it actually is like being a digital nomad and what an average day looks like for him. We talk about training and dietary recommendations for hard gainers, and we get into a lot of detail on this. So we talk about, if you're a hard gainer and you're perhaps at the intermediate stage of your training or the advanced stage, what do you do in terms of training and diet to actually optimize your gains? We talk about how important calories are for optimizing muscular gain. We talk about workout programming, skincare, because Menno has wonderful skin, so I ask him the awkward question of how does he look so great. We talk about Menno's personal diet and his own workout plan, and much, much more. For all of the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. Don't forget to hang around at the end for your free gift from me. And now I give you the one and only Menno Henselmans. Menno, welcome to Corporate Warrior. Appreciate you taking the time today to come on the show, mate.
My pleasure, man.
Cool. Okay. So I was listening in preparation for this. Was listening to a few of the interviews you've done recently or within the last 6 months, and wasn't aware that you were kind of a digital nomad in the way you live and travel and work. I'd love to hear, about your lifestyle. Can you give us like a day in the life of Menno and I guess how often you travel and what your kind of lifestyle looks like?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I can give you the elevator pitch and the much less glamorous day in a life.
Oh, both.
So the elevator pitch would be, I live wherever I want to. I travel the world. I visit a new country on average about once a month. We found that together with my girlfriend, we travel once every month, every 2 months, depending on if we know we're going to really like it somewhere. We find it's pretty ideal. We travel all over. I can do all my work on my laptop, basically. and I do have to coordinate my international speaking engagements with where we travel, because there's only so many flights you enjoy. But it's great. A day in the life, though, is a bit less glamorous than what many people think. They'll hear like, I'm in Belize, or I'm in the tropics, and they see me lying on the beach somewhere. But really, I'm you could call me a workaholic, I guess. So I spend most of my days sitting or standing. I'm a big fan of standing desks in front of my laptop. So I often do like to arrange that I have a really nice view wherever I'm sitting, because I'll be sitting there a lot. But yeah, most of the time, I'm working, and it's not like I'm hanging around on the beach. I'd say that the main difference between how I live my lifestyle is, for one, I do travel to new locations. I'm not always in the same location, and always make sure that the weather is nice somewhere. But the main thing is that when I do go on a break, some people would go to a Starbucks, have a coffee, and then I try to do stuff I find cooler, is like, visit Mayan ruins, or go snorkeling with a whale shark, or do something, that I think is, really amazing, and have that as my breaks, because I don't have that many of them. So I try to make it count.
No, it's very interesting and honest of you to say, actually it's not always as glamorous as you might think. I am stuck in front of a laptop a lot of the time. One thing I've really I've learned about lately is I've started getting into kind of Stoic philosophy, and sort of been reading more into that. And one of the things I've kind of been discussing with people and reading about lately is actually, it's rarely is it the place that makes someone happy. The place, like people sometimes think, if only I lived in this place where it's beautifully hot all year round and there's all these things, that would make me a happier person. But I think it's far more important is the people you surround yourself with wherever you are. So you can live in, you've lived in very cold climates and very hot climates, right? So you might be able to vouch for this. So even if you're living in a place where the weather is horrible, for example, if you're surrounded by certain people, it can make that's what really counts. Would you agree with that, do you think, in your experience?
Absolutely. Not only by experience, but also I used to be a business consultant before I became a fitness entrepreneur. And before I made the career switch, I extensively researched what makes people happy in life. So the psychological research on subjective well-being. And, climate does matter. Sunshine hours matters surprisingly much. It's something people seemingly do not adjust fully to. But overall climate is trivial in comparison to the importance of your social structure. And, if you enjoy your work, where you spend 8 hours a day, where it's sunny outside or not, if you don't enjoy what you're doing in front of your laptop or whatever work you're doing for 8 hours, then it's nice to be able to look outside and wish you were outside, but it doesn't help much. And sitting in the sun outside with people you don't like isn't really that fun compared to hanging out with your friends that you really do like. And then you can look outside and it's raining, but you're having fun with friends. So it's a lot more important.
I suppose ideal combination would be to have a good amount of sunshine where you live, and then also a healthy social structure alongside. That would be the perfect arrangement.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so when you're traveling, you mentioned you might travel to a different country every month. Do you plan that out like a year in advance, like so that you're not like stressing out like towards the end of the month, like, where are we going to travel, and then trying to arrange that?
We have mixed experiences in terms of how far to plan ahead. Probably the sweet spot, when we have international speaking engagements, then we do have to plan in advance. And the big benefits are it saves a lot of money on Airbnb. You can find a much nicer apartment. And also on flights in particular, even more so than Airbnb probably. With Airbnb, it's mostly that you can still find something in the same price range. It just won't be as nice. So those are big benefits. On the other hand, it can be a bit rigid. Big benefit of the nomad lifestyle is that you can go somewhere, and then if you're like, we don't like it, you can just leave. But if you're fixed in advance, then you're really limited by a schedule. We've had that a few times where we're like, okay, actually, for example, an Airbnb canceled, and then which meant we couldn't go to a certain location, but we already had the ticket from that location to somewhere else, which makes your travel plans really difficult. So it does make you a bit more rigid and can be annoying if your plans have to change. So if you have the money, it's probably nicer to just sort of wing it. But if for budget reasons, it's definitely best to plan ahead.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving the balanced view on this, because I think a lot of people sort of glamorize the digital nomad lifestyle, and there are pros and cons, and it's certainly not for everyone. Do you find that living this way, you're far more frugal and your kind of burn rate is less than if you lived in like a static location all year round?
Definitely, because everything I own in life has to fit in 2 suitcases. Now, this was quite easy for me, actually. I've always been kind of a minimalist in life. I don't use many products, beauty products and whatever. Or I have, often do well with 2 sets of jeans for the whole year. But for my girlfriend, it was a lot harder. And having everything fit into 2 suitcases is quite nice, because you have to think, okay, if I buy this, something has to go out. So it really makes you decide, what do you really need? And one rule I really like, and I like minimalist lifestyle advice in general. I think it's really good, because a lot of the stuff that you think you own really mentally sort of owns you. Because even I lived in the Netherlands for a year and a half, or maybe 2 years or so. And already then we had so much stuff we never really used. And now I basically have the rule, if I find something that I have, or it's in my suitcase or whatever, and I think, have I used this in the past 2 weeks? If not, you probably really don't need it. There are a few exceptions of things that are probably useful to have, but mostly you think, oh, this could be useful in the future, or oh, I might use this. This is really handy for this and that situation. And then 4 years later, you find it and you don't even remember you had it. And then you're like, oh yeah, but it might be useful in that situation. And when that situation actually occurs, you forget you have that object, so you don't use it. So I think people massively over the consumerist society. It's a cliche, but it's true. People massively over consume.
Yes, I completely agree with everything you just said. Have you ever written a blog post or done an interview where you've like talked about your suitcase and, like a Tim Ferriss type of thing, where he'll like draw out like a whole post on like his whole, if he goes traveling, this is his kit list. Do you have something like that? I'd love to read more about that.
Oh yeah. I don't have many gadgets really. I'm like really, really minimalist. We have some things we do carry around that you may not expect in our suit bag. Is like a mixer, a blender, food blender. It's quite big, but it's so useful.
What brand? Like a NutriBullet or?
No, that one's good, but we have a different one. I think just some cheap thing that does the job. And we have Travel Pro backpacks. Those are really nice, or bags in general. Other than that, it's just like I have my clothes. I have a camera that I use to record videos for my PT course. That is actually something, and the thing it's on, what do you call it? The camera stand, I guess.
Tripod.
The tripod, yeah. So it's an adjustable, high-quality tripod, professional camera, HD. That thing weighs like 5 kilos. So it really cuts on your baggage allowance.
Yeah, that's like a quarter of your allowance right there.
Yeah, exactly. So other than that, it's like I have some bands, some resistance bands for hotel kind of workouts. Other than that, it's just clothing. My laptop, which is an Alienware laptop and weighs like 5 kilos as well. But I figured if I'm going to spend at least 8 hours a day in front of it, I might as well get the best damn laptop on the market.
For sure.
Yeah. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, I have deodorant, one shampoo, one gel, a beard wax, toothbrush, not much stuff.
This is going to sound like a really strange question, but you always seem to have great skin. Like when I look at interviews, I'm like, this guy is so well groomed. Like, what's your secret?
Health. I found that being super healthy was for me really the key. So, and there's also actually interesting research that people think being tanned makes you attractive, but it's actually mostly the skin tone that is a function of the amount of in particular beta carotene that is in your diet. So it makes you more orange. And people think that having a really tan skin is what makes people look so healthy, but it's really the orange tint in your skin. So a healthy diet with lots of beta carotene, not too much, because you can actually get like the super orange look, and then it's like, it doesn't really look that unhealthy until it becomes extreme, but it looks kind of weird. But just a really healthy diet, low inflammation index of the diet I find helps too. There's actually recently researched for a PT course everything about acne, and many of these common sayings about acne, like chocolate gives you acne, dairy gives you acne, they're actually true. And it's not just acne, but in general more less smoothly textured skin. So I find that diet is really the big contributing factor, and some sunlight exposure does really help. I find dermatologists always say like avoid the sun. I find that total crap, and they're like, it's inflammatory, but it's actually anti-inflammatory until you get DNA damage, ultraviolet damage, which is really damaging. But as long as you keep it moderate and you don't get sunburned or even close to it, then I find it helps.
Which foods are high in beta carotene?
Anything interesting. This is one of those things like if you eat orange foods, you'll probably turn orange. So it's like carrots, pumpkin. A lot of veggies and fruits have at least some amounts of it.
What about sweet potatoes?
As well. So it's pretty much literally like if it's kind of yellow, orange kind of food, then it's probably high in beta carotene.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's something I might try out on myself. Another thing, I guess, last question on your kind of like travel lifestyle is how do you find? It must be difficult because you obviously stay in good shape all year round. And how do you find places to exercise? Do you tend to default train at home or wherever you're staying, or do you just have how do you arrange that?
If I have no other option, I'll just train at home or in a hotel. However, I always make sure there are basically 3 primary features that we research before we go anywhere, in addition to just, we liking the place. That is, 1, there has to be a supermarket nearby, a well-equipped one, not like if you're in Uganda, middle of nowhere, kind of, you have 2 kind of veggies and goat meat, and that's it. But like an actual kind of sort of Western supermarket. 2, there has to be a gym nearby, and we have to know that it has a squat rack. We actually we ask people, we Facebook them, we call them if needed via Skype or whatever. We have to make sure there is a gym and they have a squat rack. If they don't have a good gym, I'm not going there. Screw that place. 3, they have internet with at least 10 MB per second, and we recently upped this to 20 MB per second because in our experience, the download speed doesn't say that much. Basically, in countries where connection is just unstable, or I don't know, where you just expect it to be crap. Even in Thailand and stuff, where they're pretty technologically advanced, if the provider cannot arrange internet of at least 20 MB per second, probably the connection isn't that stable, which means that, when the connection hits, the download speed is actually going to be good. It's going to be okay to actually download something, but for something like Skype, it's going to be pretty crappy. So since I have a lot of Skype consultation and interviews and stuff, we basically decided that 20 MB per second is pretty much the minimum we can really professionally deal with.
Interesting. Yeah, I love that you have like a strict criteria. It's awesome. I used to work in IT sales for close on sort of 8 years. So I sold internet to businesses. And I guess the thing that's important to you is the upload speed as well. Because if it says, we provide 10 meg down or 20 meg down, it's not always symmetrical with the upload. The upload's often like, 5% of that or 10% of that. Is that what you found? Is that what's been a bottleneck for you? Is that upload speed, or has that not been that important?
Yeah, I think for Skype, it is. Like, I'm not sure if it's relevant for just browsing and stuff.
No, but video will be. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's cool. Do you have like a checklist on like Evernote or something like that where you're like, right, these are the things we must check, or is it just ingrained in your mind now whenever you?
Yeah, those 3 things are like the main things that we ingrain, but we actually have some checklists also when we leave a place. Like we have a whole checklist of check this and just go through it. It's a lot easier, we find, than just trying to remember everything, because there's a lot of things that apply, for example, in South America or in Asia, but they never really apply anywhere else. Like some Airbnb apartments have you check the electricity and stuff, others do not, and it really varies per region how they deal with the rules. So certain things you often forget if you think, I don't need to know this, but then you get back to Asia or something, and then suddenly the rules are a bit different for what you have to take into account.
Right, let's get into some conversation around exercise, because that is the main reason why we are here. And I know my listeners will probably get bored of me asking all the lifestyle questions. So, you've got this fantastic blog, Bayesian Bodybuilding. Hopefully I've pronounced that correctly. With I love the way you deconstruct the science. I'm not a massive fan of trawling through PubMed and trying to, read scientific articles and find the best ones. And you've done a great job of like bringing those together under certain topics. And I know you cover some of this already. I haven't been able to read every one of your blog articles, so I am probably going to cover some ground you've covered before, either via interviews or through blogs. But I will ask. Sure. I will ask anyway. So, at this point, when you talk to hard gainers, so I guess typically ectomorphic men or women who are trying to, I say we keep to men just to keep it simple or simpler. When let's say they've been doing weight training for 5+ years, they're kind of intermediate to advanced level, but they're trying to kind of optimize muscle gain. What are your, I guess, principles and tips that you provide them with from a programming point of view and also diet and whatever else?
I find that for intermediate, it's basically kind of a specialty, but getting intermediate trainees to the advanced level. And there isn't really like one magic trick. It really comes down to fine-tuning everything. Like many people underrate the importance of micronutrients, of lifestyle factors like sleep and circadian rhythm factors. You have to really big things that you have to optimize are the training volume over time, energy balance, macronutrients. Nutrient timing also comes into play, has become like a debated thing, but in my mind, it's more of a question of, to what extent it matters and in which circumstances rather than if it matters. So it's kind of, you optimize everything, exercise selection, and that all together, all those little things, they add up. And I find that a big distinction here is that many people think, the research shows that this is 80% of your result and the rest is only going to be 20%. But I find that once you get to a certain level of advancement, there is just a certain threshold, not just dose response, but a threshold that you need to overcome to actually stimulate more muscle growth. So if you do things, too wrong, then you're just not going anywhere. It's not the case that you can just, mess around. Many people have experienced this. Even if you train hard and you just mess around in the gym, over, even years, you may not get anywhere. So you do have to do things right a certain way. And then once you're past that threshold, then you get significant diminishing returns. So I find that, there's not really one magic thing. In terms of hard gainers specifically, for one, I'd forget about ectomorph. That's actually ectomorph, the somatotyping. Is derived, interestingly, from psychological research, not from physiology. And it was sort of this ancient idea that people with a different body structure, they have a different mind as well. And it sort of ventured off into the physiological circles, this idea. And then became known as, you have these hard gainers that are tall and skinny, and then you have fat, short people they put on muscle easy, but they have a hard time losing fat. And then you have people that have the best of both worlds, mesomorphs, and they are awesome, and they just have it all. But in reality, it's just a spectrum. People vary in their metabolic rate, people vary in height, and they're all kind of independent, normally distributed variables that people have in their body. And it's certainly the case that you have certain people that are tall and skinny and they have a high metabolism. You could call them an ectomorph, but it doesn't really, mean anything. It's just a way to categorize the data. So being a hard gainer, you can be short and fat and whatever, and you can still be a hard gainer. Not necessarily have to be an ectomorph. What makes someone a hard gainer? Well, there are a lot of factors. And a lot of them you cannot do anything about because it's just, there are genetic differences. We do have research, interestingly, one specific study on hard gainers, or what research calls non-responders. So we say hard gainers, research say non-responders, which would be the most hard of hard gainers, people that literally they do not respond to training. However, we have two very interesting studies on this. One study found that it wasn't endurance training, but the same principle probably applies to strength training, that people who are non-responders to a certain training protocol, they simply need more volume. So they don't get any results if they have a training with a low volume, but if they train with a higher volume, they do get results. So it's not the case that, they're a non-responder, you're screwed, it's genetics. It's just that some people need a higher training volume to get the same results as other people. And the other study is actually interesting in that some people with a certain genetic makeup, like the genes that we commonly find in sprinters, for example, may actually benefit from the lower volume. So it's not just the case that they would also get better results with higher volume. They may actually get worse results if they train with that same volume. So people vary in terms of the optimal volume that they need. And it can go both ways. But for many people, I think, in my experience, it is definitely the case that many people that identify themselves as hard gainers train with low volume and often also effort. So, some people, not very common in my clients, but because I attract quite serious trainees, but I do notice that there are a lot of people who say, like, I'm a hard gainer, nothing happens, and they're simply not working that hard in the gym. So that's like a primary thing to get right. You have to give it effort, and then you can think about science and everything and optimization.
And now it's time for a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Health IQ, a life insurance company that helps health-conscious people like runners, cyclists, weightlifters, high-intensity training participants, and more get a lower rate on their life insurance. Go to healthiq.com/cwarrior to support the show and see if you qualify. If you take care of yourself, you do smart strength training, you eat well, and your life insurance company doesn't seem like they care, there's an answer for you. Health IQ actually gives savings to people who take care of themselves. About 56% of Health IQ customers save between 4 and 33% on their life insurance because of this. To see if you qualify, get your free quote today at healthiq.com/cwarrior or mention a promo code CWarrior when you talk to a Health IQ agent. And now back to the show. What kind of protocols do you advocate, like, in a single session? What might a typical session look like in terms of exercises, but also in terms of, like, sets and reps and cadence and stuff like that?
It varies a lot. So I recommend the basic program parameters, intensity, volume, frequency. I adjust those upward based on how advanced someone is. So a very low-level, novice-level trainee probably has very little reason. A few studies show this, that of training with more than about 60% of 1 RM. However, more advanced trainees, especially for strength development, have huge benefits of going heavier. Novices also, the training volume in terms of sets per week, which is the measure that you want to look at. Sets per week per muscle group. Many people think of volume as something on a whole body level or per a workout or anything. No, that's not what the body cares about. The body cares about for each individual muscle, because muscle growth is by and large a local process. What is the stimulus? The amount of stress imposed on that muscle over time. So it's sets per week per muscle group. And this, even for like the most untrained level novices, you probably want to start with, for maximum results, this is about 10 sets per week. And then this scales upward to about 30 sets, depending on how advanced you are. If your women can tolerate a bit higher volumes, I find, and also research shows they tolerate metabolic stress and muscle damage better. So it varies on a lot of factors: lifestyle, sleep, stress. Also individual response to, do they want maximum results, or are they okay with just, seeking a good compromise, want to be in the gym a few times, get good results, and not be in the gym every day for 2 hours. So that always comes into play as well. You have to look at the dose response, if not just, is this better than this, but is it worth it?
So you talked about set recommendations, which I remember talking to Brad Schoenfeld about, and obviously seeing in some of his research about that. Because I've heard you talk about, especially with advanced trainees, you advocate kind of really high frequency protocols. Now, if you're doing that, but you're assuming you stay within that kind of 10 sets per muscle group. Does that mean you would do like 1 or 2 sets per day? Or you would advocate that? I know it differs, but...
It could be, yeah. So I wouldn't normally recommend daily training to a novice. So if you're doing 10 sets a day and you want maximum results, you're probably a novice. So then I'd probably train a muscle once or twice a week, maybe 3 times. But once you get to more intermediate, advanced levels, then it's not uncommon for my programs to train a muscle, once every 72 hours, pretty much at a minimum, and once every 48 or 24 hours, which is daily training, quite commonly as well, if they can tolerate and recover from it. And if you're not going super high volume, it can indeed mean that you're only doing like 2 sets per muscle group per session. Mm-hmm. Usually it comes out to more like 3 or so, though.
Okay. And I'm assuming that you wouldn't want to change the workout program very frequently because you don't want to have to retrain that kind of skill aspect. Because I guess the whole point that an advanced trainee is able to cope with greater frequency is because they do less damage per session. And obviously, if you change the program, you change the exercises, and that could change. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of program hopping or very frequent program changes. I think many coaches like these concepts, honestly, because it's basically a way of faking progression. So strength. You can think of strength as the sum of neural and morphological gains. So you have neural and morphological contributions to that make you stronger. Basically, a muscle gets bigger. That's morphological. And your nervous system, like your brain, but also aspects of the nervous system, like rate coding and things that happen below the brain and in the spine and up until the muscle. Many things basically make your muscles capable of utilizing the existing muscle mass better. So that's basically your nervous system is like the driver of the car, and the muscle size is like the size of the engine of the car. So you can get a better driver or you can get a bigger engine. Both will make you drive faster or stronger. If you're doing a new exercise, your body will quickly get accustomed to that motor pattern, that movement, which means that the driver, the nervous system, quickly learns to perform that movement better. And basically anyone, even a very advanced trainee, can get stronger at an exercise they're only doing for the first few sessions. Like you can even try whatever exercise you do, doesn't really matter. Do it, and then 1 week later or a few days later, try it again. It doesn't matter what kind of program you're on, you'll be stronger on that new exercise because it's just your nervous system has learned the trick of performing that movement more optimally. And it doesn't mean anything for muscle growth. So if you put your clients on programs and every 4 weeks you put them on a new program, it's like infinite strength progression. You're like, look, everything's going great. But, try getting an advanced trainee that's bench pressing 400 pounds or something. Try getting them to bench press 450 pounds. That's real progress. And that will probably be accompanied with muscle growth. So that's basically my goal. And with training is to get them from a good to a great level of strength on a certain set of exercises that we deem optimal. Now, you may change certain aspects of it. You want to respond to progression, definitely. So if an exercise is completely stuck, something has to change. The progression model, maybe even the exercise itself. But generally, I like to change things in the program based on the actual progression and not just overhaul everything and induce variety for the sake of variety. Now, if someone says, okay, Menno, I am completely tired of this exercise here, overhead shrugs, for example, not well liked by some people. It's like overhead shrugs, they just don't do it for me. I'm not motivated to do them. I don't like it. I can't be arsed to do them with good intensity at all. And it's like, okay, so we switch that one. That's a valid reason. Yeah. But just switch things up, I'm not a fan of.
You sounded very British then when you said can't be arsed.
Yeah, I have a bit of a mixed accent.
No, it was quite refreshing to hear that expression. Okay, so just I guess digging more into the details of the protocol. Do you advocate trainees train to failure?
Not often, no. Really? I think training to failure is very suitable in low volume programs, if recovery is not an issue. But the main problem with training to failure in high volume programs is that the risk reward basically is very poor, or the cost benefit. So you induce a lot more neuromuscular fatigue Metabolic stress in particular goes through the roof, and your work capacity for subsequent sets also takes a nosedive. So if you go to failure and then for the next 3 sets, your work capacity is going to be much lower than if you had not gone to failure. So research is not favorable at all about these effects, and the net effect of that decrease in work capacity can be negative for both muscle growth and strength development. So if you're only doing like 1 set though, or only a few sets, or you only go to failure on the last set, and recovery is not an issue, then it can be beneficial. But if you're doing like super high volume training, like taking every set to failure is not going to be, it's either going to result in overreaching, or it's going to be very inefficient use of your recovery capacities. It's like you have a certain budget, you know, what you can recover from stress wise. Training to failure is not a very efficient allocation of that budget.
Interesting perspective. So you don't. So I'm going to assume then that you would see a protocol that was like far lower in frequency, but trained to muscular failure every session. So let's just say, for argument's sake, and I know this is going to vary for every individual, but for argument's sake, you had 2 sessions a week, full body, 1 set to failure on every muscle group. You think that's still going to be inferior to, do you think that's going to be inferior to an approach where you have much higher frequency and more volume, but obviously less intensity?
Intensity as in proximity to failure, you mean?
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yes. So I think research on training to failure is quite clear. Basically, if you have a certain low volume of training and you take it to failure versus not taking it to failure, you're going to get better results. If you have a high volume of training, it's debatable. It depends on what happens to total volume, basically. Given the same total volume, I think it's correct that there isn't, oh no, that's not true, but for muscle growth at least, there isn't a single study that shows training to failure increases muscle growth given the same total volume of not training to failure. For strength development, it's a bit more mixed. There's also tons more research. In fact, the research on training to failure for muscle growth often doesn't reveal any significant difference between groups. I think there are 5 really high-quality studies that even if you're like one group's training to failure, one group's not. So the group training to failure actually does a lot more volume and just training harder, and they get the same muscle growth. So it's I think it's only one of those 5 studies actually. But one is really relevant. It's one of 4 studies. It's Martorelli et al. 2017, I think, where they show that 3 groups. One is training to failure with 3 sets at 70% of 1RM, if I recall correctly. One group does 3 sets of 7, so it's submaximal, because at 70% you would do like 12 reps if you went to failure. And one group does 4 sets of 7, so they do the same volume as the failure group, but submaximally. And the submaximal 4-set group gained the same amount of muscle mass as the 3 sets to failure group, but they both gained more than the only 3 sets of 7 that just trained really submaximally. So, training to failure does add some stimulus, but it's pretty low, and it's mainly because of simply the fact you're doing more volume.
Got it. Okay. This is interesting. This kind of brings me onto the subject of nihilism, which I know you've wrote about before. I have a little bit of I think our perspectives may differ on this, because I find the more I learn that, or seem to believe that variables don't matter, the more I find that quite liberating. And I'm of the belief, and you may disagree with this, that, most stuff doesn't matter, and that actually, and we're talking about getting like, let's say 80-90% of one's gains, that actually training, twice a week, full body to muscular failure with maybe 5 or 6 movements. Again, this varies obviously a little bit. And, nutrient timing doesn't matter a great deal from what I understand. Like, I just feel, I personally find that quite liberating, because it stops a lot of the confusion for me. How do you think about that? Because I just appreciate you sharing your view on this nihilism in exercise, which I think you have a bit of an aversion to.
Yeah, so I distinguish what I also ask in my intake forms for clients between people that want to reach a good lifestyle compromise for their training and people that just want maximum results. Like if you're a physique competitor and you tell someone, well, this nutrient timing thing, it's not that important. They don't care. They want to know, is this going to make the difference, or is this going to be beneficial at all? Like, I'm not aiming for silver. I'm not aiming for bronze. I'm aiming for gold. I want to know what's the most amount of muscle mass I can build. I want to do everything in my power to achieve that, right? So then you're not going to tell them these things. Maybe they don't matter. We don't research on this, so this we won't do. But if you have someone that's like, okay, I have about 3 hours a week that I'm willing to devote to this. This is not, a main priority in my life. I just want to, look good naked, not invest too much in it, have a comfortable lifestyle, probably not even track your macros. I'm not a big fan of that at all for these kind of people. I think the cost benefit is very poor. For decades to come, for people that just want to have a family and everything and want decent results, but not invest too much in their fitness, then, it's a different story. Because you have to weigh, like I said, not just is it beneficial, but do the benefits outweigh the costs? That is the decision if you want to implement a certain method in a program. So if you're like, I'm going to do low volume training, I'm doing one set, 2 workouts a week, and you're willing to train to failure, some men in particular, they like that, then train to failure, definitely. But if your goal is, okay, I want to really devote myself to maximize muscle growth, or you're like, okay, I actually want to step it up a bit this period, then I'd say rather than perform the first set to failure, add a set or add a workout or something. That's going to give you better results. But, of course, it does require more time as well. So it's mostly a cost benefit thing, I'd say. And taking into account that there are sharply diminishing returns once you have the big picture things in place, and then fine tuning things quickly becomes a lot of effort for small results.
Can you elaborate? Like, what are, in your opinion, what are the big picture things that those people should address at the very least?
Yeah, big picture things that we have tons of research on. They're just absolutely indisputable. The importance of total weekly training volume. You have to train with a certain training volume and a certain effort to just get anywhere. And that can be just 2 workouts. I think in 2 workouts, you can definitely progress. I'd say 2 workouts is pretty much the minimum, though. If you want to get beyond intermediate level, 2 workouts is like the absolute minimum I recommend. Total weekly volume, so that's number 1. Energy balance is number 2. You don't have to track your energy intake. You can do it ad libitum and regulate food choices or things like that instead of energy intake. But energy intake matters whether you're tracking it or not. So total energy balance or calories count, total weekly training volume. You have to give it some effort. The more work you do in the gym, as long as you can recover from it, the better your results. And protein intake is another big one. Like, you need to be on a high protein diet, at least 1.6 gram per kilogram per day of protein. That's basically the threshold. Last year, we published a meta-analysis that confirmed what I had been in a very controversial article, been stating a long time. There hasn't been a single study that finds benefits beyond this point. So, you can go a bit above it to be safe, but and I do recommend 1.8 gram instead of 1.6. Gram protein per kilogram total body weight per day for most people, but 1.6 is basically the minimum you want to hit, I'd say. So those are really the super big picture things. And you want a diet that's at least, primarily grounded in whole foods, not McDonald's.
That's great. Thank you for that. I meant to ask you this a bit earlier, and you just reminded me with regard to diet. So again, in the context of a hard gainer type, and I read a really good blog article you put together, which summarized a few studies on how, we've shown that people can gain muscle on a weight loss diet, on a calorie deficit. And just take me as an example, right? So I'm probably a typical hard gainer type. I probably maxed out most of my muscle gains, or noob gains as they call it, years ago. And now I'm probably, to be fair, I'm probably just retaining. And based on the way you look at things, I might even be I could be retaining and not actually improving. in terms of muscle hypertrophy. So, but what I've also noticed is, I've never been one to really, I've done the Tim Ferriss Geek to Freak experiment. And I just got fat, right? You've probably had people come to you about that. And, I've since moved to, well, that was years ago. But more recently, I've just made sure that I'm getting my, 1.8 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight through whole food, steak, eggs, things like that. And I don't count calories. And I just kind of let my appetite regulate itself, and that just tends to organically mean that I'm kind of doing intermittent fasting, lunch, and then dinner. I'm curious though, do you feel like, again, I know it's very contextual, but that you need somewhat of a calorie surplus in addition to a protein intake to drive optimal gains? Or do you think most people are just going to get fat and it's not necessary? How do you think about that?
For optimal gains, yes. So we have few good studies on this. I actually have an article coming up on the blog as well where I go into all the research. Cool. But I can spill the beans. The benefit is really small. It's not only the case that you can gain muscle in deficit. The research we have actually finds that the differences between energy deficit and surplus, and especially between very moderate surplus, like just being in energy surplus, and being in like hefty energy surplus, are minimal. In fact, non-significant in most research. So you're talking in terms of muscle protein balance data, because like I said, muscle growth is often not even detectably different between, say, 5% energy surplus and 15 or so. So you're talking in terms of muscle protein synthesis, which is at least a proxy, for maybe on the long term what will matter for muscle growth. You're talking about I think a 20% difference, 10% in a few studies, 20% in others, 14 in one, I think, between maintenance and a 40% energy deficit. So you can go into an aggressive cut, an aggressive energy deficit, and that will likely, based on these data, reduce your rate of muscle growth by about 20%. So yes, you'll want to be in energy surplus. And in my experience, once you get to a super advanced level, then you basically need to be in energy surplus to get any more muscle growth. But for most people, like non-power lifters, non-elite lifters, you can gain close to the same amount of muscle mass while cutting. So it depends on how advanced you are, but the difference is not as big as most traditional bodybuilders will claim.
So how does one calculate what they need to consume? You say, let's talk about an advance, because I'm kind of thinking about myself here and people in my position who have been training for a while. I would probably say I'm relatively, I don't even know how you define intermediate and advanced, but I've been, because I guess a lot of people have been training for a long time, but probably in the wrong way. So they're definitely not advanced. Right. But let's just assume I am. How would I then calculate my calorie requirements accurately?
Right. So that's a bit tricky to explain in audio, but what you want to do is you want to look at all the components of your metabolism, so thermic effect of food, BMR, activity level, energy expenditure from resistance training, and factor those up. Then you have your energy expenditure, and then you can adjust your energy intake to get in the desired state of energy balance, surplus, deficit, or maintenance. The formula for BMR, which is the biggest component, is you can find online. It's the Cunningham formula that's performed best in research.
How do you spell that? Sorry?
Cunningham.
Oh, got it. Okay.
So it's like, you're a very cunning fox, and then he's eating ham. Cunningham. With that formula, you can estimate BMR. It's the best formula because it's based on lean body mass. It's valid for obese and lean people like athletes and non-athletes. So it's really good. And the best formula for that in research. Then you have to look at you have to factor in your activity level, estimate your thermic effect of food, which is going to be in between, 0% in pretty unrealistic scenarios, and more likely between 10 and 20% increase in energy expenditure. It's like the energy your body needs to digest food. So it's like 10 to 20% of the energy you consume is going to be wasted, in our case, favorably, because it needs the energy to digest and absorb all the nutrients. Activity factor is going to factor, but vary between, and the most 50%. Usually it's going to be 10, maybe 20% increase in energy expenditure if you're like lightly or moderately active. For many people, really, in our society these days, especially if you have office work, it's going to be 0. Your sedentary is going to be just factor 1. And then resistance training is going to burn about 0.1 calorie per kilogram body weight per minute. So you add that all up, then you have your maintenance energy expenditure or maintenance energy intake, and then you adjust it up or down depending on whether you want to be in deficit or surplus.
And should I want to be in a surplus every day?
If you're like bulking, you don't want fat loss, and all you care about is muscle growth, you're lean enough, then yes, I would put someone in a moderate energy surplus for a bulk. Basically, what I do is I find a sweet spot where you are maximizing energy intake, but it's not spilling over into fat gain. Because once you get to that point, you're going to gain a lot more fat and just, marginally more muscle mass. What I call, or what many people now call, dreamer bulking.
Do you, when you're like programming the diet, do you give cheat days or cheat meals? Do you allow those?
It depends on the client, but I'm generally not a big fan of cheat meals and cheat days. I say they're at your own discretion, and I think it's really bad practice to plan them in advance, because if you tell them one, there's a lot of psychological research behind it, but the intuition is basically, like, example I always give is, if Saturday is your pancake day, then Sunday to Friday are going to be thinking about pancake day. That's how it works. And it's like, people think they have this, there was this, I think it's Plato or Socrates or something came up with the concept that you have a certain craving, and then you need to just indulge in it, and then it's gone. Wrong. It doesn't work that way at all. It's like, that's like the kind of person that, you're hungover, you've been binge drinking, you wake up and I'm never going to drink alcohol again. Next week you're drinking again, right? So it's like, oh, I have a craving for pizza now. I'm going to eat 8 pizzas and then it's gone. And after 8 pizzas, you're like, I've eaten enough pizza for the whole month. And the next morning, you're probably already like, I could have pizza. Yep, I could have pizza again. Pretty sure. So, the craving, the stilling of the craving lasts you until your appetite is back. That's it. So there are a few people who it works for to sort of indulge in certain cheat foods, but then I find just fit them into your macros. If you like them that much, fit them into your macros, and it's fine. But planning a cheat meal like that, and especially because for a lot of people, it means like all the brakes are off, right? So it's like, if it's pancake day, and this is the only day where I can eat pancakes, then I'm going to have my pancakes. So they stuff themselves like way beyond the point of, satiety, and the point where this is comedian Louis C.K., I think he says, the meal isn't over when I'm full, the meal is over when I hate myself. So that's what happens then, right? So I think it's not psychologically healthy to plan, no holds barred limits, cheat meals like that.
I completely agree. I think that's really useful to look at it like that. Have you got a hard stop at 1 p.m. my time, Menno? I'm just checking. So 5 minutes, or can you run over?
I can go about 10 minutes over.
Cool, okay. I'm really curious. What does your diet look like day to day?
I'm actually on a similar diet as you, it sounds like. So I'm not tracking my macros. I'm eating 2 meals a day. However, I do space them meticulously around my workout. So I have 1 meal, then I work out a few hours after, and then I have a huge meal after that in the evening. So, and I do pay attention to my circadian rhythm. I have them at consistent times, spaced around. So usually it's like at 8 I have dinner, and at 2 I have brunch. And in between those, I work out. So I'm not sure if it's optimal to have only 2 meals a day, but I find it just works extremely well for adherence for me and convenience.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, and for women, it really doesn't work well. I find like 2 meals a day, for most women, does not work. But for men, especially that have a relatively sedentary lifestyle and are more, kind of thinkers, introverted, personality type, depending on what psychological profile you use to describe them, it tends to work quite well. Like IT people in general, if someone has an IT background, I can tell that probably a lower meal frequency is going to work well for them, and intermittent fasting as well. There's also research actually to suggest this. But yeah, I know it's very legit though, my diet. Like I know there are a lot of Instagram. What I should do marketing wise is look at all my cheat meals and say like, oh, I'm eating sushi and now I'm eating pizza and pancakes and look at how fucking ripped I am. But it's just not reality. I have very, very strict I always eat whole foods. It's always very nutritious, healthy, like just really legit diet. Lots of veggies, so nothing, no magical method there that allows you to get ripped while eating ice cream every day. I think that's just something that I really detest that in today's Instagram culture. Like a lot of people, they eat. You have all these bodybuilders and they live on white rice and broccoli, and I'm like, dude, your diet really sucks, man. Like your diet is it's like prison diet. And then once a week they go out and they have pizza, and then that's what they take a photo of on Instagram. It's like, look, I'm eating pizza. Next week, look, I'm eating ice cream. But they don't show you it's like all the other meals across the week. It's like plain broccoli. They don't even salt that shit. So it's just really dishonest and makes people think that, they look that great and they're eating all these foods. But they must have some magic method, It's like, no, it's just false advertising.
Absolutely. What does it, I mean, you've obviously, I'd love you to elaborate on what a plate of food looks like typically for you. Like, give us what did you, I suppose you're about to have brunch after this probably. But what will you have for brunch today and dinner today? All
right. Today I'm probably going for sushi for dinner, and lunch is going to be gözlemes, which is or my version of it, which is like a high protein variant of Turkish pizza, which is based on egg whites with tomatoes, a little cheese, lots and lots of egg whites in it. And if you create it just right and you let the egg whites swell and add a little potato starch, it makes it really like dense and starchy and highly voluminous and super satiating. So you can basically have what looks like an utter cheat meal, but actually keep it in 1,100 calories. Pretty awesome.
Nice. So what does your macros look like day to day?
I wouldn't know at the moment. Like I'm not tracking them, but
if you had to guess.
I'd say it's probably protein is going to be. I'm going to overshoot protein. Probably going to consume about 200 gram protein. Energy from fat is going to be 20 to 40% of total, probably. So 20 to 40% of my energy intake is going to be from fat, and rest carbs.
So what would that look like? Would that be like kind of a low carb approach, or what would that?
Balanced, I'd say. Like, if you ask a bodybuilder, they're going to say that's low carb.
Yeah.
But if you ask, someone from Paleo FX or from the keto group, they're going to be like, that's super high carb. So there's always these differences between people, like low versus high carb. It's like, define the terms and then we can talk further. But yeah, I'd say that's balanced and in line with what many institutions recommend for optimal health.
Cool. So I've got a couple of rapid fire questions. They don't have to be answered in a rapid fire way, but I'm very curious to hear your answers to some of these, and we'll start wrapping up in sort of 5 to 7 minutes.
Sure.
What you obviously read a lot of the literature in exercise and health and fitness, and you're working with clients all the time, like you really are in the trenches. I'd love to hear, what have you changed your mind about in relation to, I guess, muscle gain and improving clients' physiques in the last kind of 6 to 12 months, or in recent memory?
6 to 12. Okay, it's not 6 to 12 months, but it is it's still in memory, not recent either. But one thing that I think is good to show this as an example is actually training frequency. So I actually used to be a proponent of decreasing the training frequency a little bit and dramatically upping the volume for my advanced trainees, based on meta-analyses by Wernbaum and Rea et al. However, as more research emerged and the Norwegian Frequency Project was done, I started experimenting with higher training frequencies for more advanced trainees and myself. And I found that worked a lot better. And I think the research, especially now, also supports that they are at least as good as lower frequencies, as long as you keep total volume in check. So actually used to be sort of a proponent of low frequency, or at least moderate, and I became a proponent of higher frequencies later. So many things. It's more like, small fine-tuning of your methods over time. Because I think for a lot of people, when they see a new study, it's a bit like they skip to the end of a book and then they complain they don't get the ending. So if you're not familiar with all the literature on a subject, then a new study is going to often seem very groundbreaking. But if you're familiar with all the literature on a subject, then usually a study just, edges you in a certain direction. Like it's maybe once a year that the study gets published, which is really like, okay, this dramatically changes what we thought we knew. Mm-hmm. But often it's just more like,
like adds weight to an argument. Yeah,
exactly.
And to your point on that, I do think there is a lot of problems with scientific literature, especially in resistance exercise, primarily because of often due to sample size, the actual subjects themselves, which are often like young college students and male. And then that data gets then interpreted to have a much wider effect size than it actually does, if that makes sense, if I've used that term correctly. And it comes back to, all of this has to be looked at in the context of the individual and how actually some of this data, do you agree with this, is probably not that relevant to the individual?
Yeah, exercise science is a very poor field in terms of science if you compare it to, say, psychology, which is, the field I mostly studied with economics during my studies. The most research that is published in exercise science would be scoffed at by psychologists. And the main problem often is that muscle growth and strength development have an inherently huge variance between subjects. So inter-individual variability is huge. If you combine that with low sample sizes, it's very easy to get results that are all over the place. Now, the most common problem this gives is low statistical power, which means that many studies do not find effects, even when there very well might be. And indeed, in replication studies with more subjects or meta-analyses, there are benefits. So we have a lot of null findings that are probably not true null findings, but also we get inflated effect sizes. So some studies find that this matters, and it's like, so this seems to result in 40% more muscle growth. And then later, it turns out that it's actually a small effect size and it's not that big a deal. So you really have to be on point with your interpretation of methodological limitations. Also, when it comes to different measures of muscle growth, MRI versus ultrasound and stuff, in exercise science, more than most other fields.
This is why we need people like you to help us make sense of the studies, because unless you're a trained scientist or devote a lot of time to sifting through it all and keeping up to date, it's impossible for most people, in my opinion. Okay, final question for you. This is going to be a bit of a strange one. If you were to give obviously, people know you for being someone who helps people optimize their physiques and as a fitness model and helps fitness competitors and stuff like that. But if you were to give a TED talk on something you're not known for, what would it be on?
Probably maximization of happiness, how to be the happiest possible. Actually, like in the very distant future, I'd have plans for a website called Apex Living. Ooh. And I talk more about, lifestyle stuff, being a digital nomad, a different approach than a typical 9-to-5 corporate office life, marriage, that kind of stuff.
Oh, I am very excited about that. When's that coming out? Do you know?
Oh, long way ahead, because I probably first want to publish a few more scientific studies. My book, which is now going to be, it's going to be a lot about psychology, ad libitum dieting, psychological factors of dieting. So also things I'm not known for, and that I sort of want to compile all together in this book and reveal for the first time outside of the PT course, because there are people who know them. But yeah, maybe like in the long distant future. So definitely not anytime soon.
Awesome. Well, I would absolutely love to potentially do a part 2 in the future to talk about happiness. I think that'd be a really fun topic to discuss. Awesome. Menno, this has been so much fun. What is the best way for people to find out more about you?
Everything I post is going to be linked in some way from BeijanBodybuilding.com. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm mostly active on Facebook. So you can subscribe by your favorite method and follow my stuff.
Yeah, it's a great blog, guys, and you probably are familiar with it already. But I love it. I can see how minimalist you are just by looking at your blog. It's so clean and efficient, and I think anyone who's got that type of mindset is going to enjoy reading the stuff on it. And to everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. But if you just want to go straight to the blog post for this episode, go to corporatewarrior.co/Menno. And until next time, guys, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's CORP warrior.com, to get your free high-intensity training Google Progress Chart, an ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill Day Simone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are deliberately not verbatim. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, enter your email address, then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts.